start. Welcoming everybody to the Design for Aging committee meeting for March. We're excited to have a very important subject today. We have two guest speakers that I will introduce, and we hope that the second part of the discussion, the committee meeting, will be an interactive discussions amongst ourselves, but also with our guest speakers. I ask that when people would like to speak, is that they raise their hands, they speak slowly. We have two interpreters with us here today that will help translate into American Sign Language. And if you don't mind also stating your name before you speak and you ask the question or be part of the conversation. So our subject today is about designing spaces for further inclusivity, including people who are deaf, blind, and hard of hearing. And we are joined today by Robert Nichols, and soon to join our call is Chuck Crush. I will make an introduction to our speakers, and then I will turn it over for the formal presentation. I'll introduce Robert first. Robert Nichols is the owner and principal of Nichols Design Associates in Washington, D.C. since 1993, specializes in universal design, deaf space design, and Americans with Disabilities Act accessibility guidelines. His expertise includes building surveys and the design of barrier-free environments for major governmental, commercial, institutional, and residential clients. Prior to establishing his own business, he worked as an accessibility specialist at the U.S. Access Board in Washington, D.C., revising and updating guidelines related to telecommunications for the deaf, using technical assistance by calling and mailing responses to typical questions. He was an instructor and guest lecturer in design studio at Boston Architectural College, the BAC as we know it, University of Maryland in College Park, and University of Notre Dame School of Architecture. Robert is also the executive director of the board of World Deaf Architecture since the group was formed and incorporated into a nonprofit in 2016. As a nonprofit organization affiliated within the subdivision of the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the AIA in Washington, D.C., the organization's growing ranks include individuals with various levels of deafness, hard of hearing, deaf and blind, and full hearing abilities. I will introduce Chuck. I think Chuck is just starting to join, connecting to the audio. Hi, Chuck. You joined us right on time. I was about to start your introduction.
Well, that's good, because my introduction is I just got stuck with my car. So that's what was the delay. So okay. I am here.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So Chuck Crush, who just joined us, is the executive director of New England Homes for the Deaf. He has an extensive experience in healthcare administration at the private and the public levels. Prior to joining New England Homes for the Deaf, Chuck served as the executive director for operations for many benchmark properties and as hospice administrator for Sun Healthcare Corporation. He is a licensed nursing home administrator and active volunteer in his native state of New Hampshire, where he served as DHHS Commissioner, Department of Health and Human Services Commissioner, a board member of Association of New Hampshire Residential Care Homes, and he's an elected member of Concord School Board. Chuck is also active in Massachusetts, and he serves as a board member of Leading Age Massachusetts. It's good to note that Chuck is also fluent in American Sign Language. Chuck, we have with us here today interpreters. I don't know what is your choice of communication when we are in such a setting, but I'll leave it up to you.
Yeah, I would. Oh, I'm sorry. I would prefer to use the interpreters, Philippe, because I'm not as fluent as you. Made me sound way better on my resume too than in reality. So, and I wish I was better at sign language, but I would prefer it. Thank you.
No problem. So I have just few elements before we start the conversation. So this is an AIA accredited discussion. So people will earn 1.5 HSW credit. I will drop the Google form again in the chat. Please go ahead and sign up, put your credentials, and the BSA will file it for you. I also would like to ask those who recently joined us and could turn their camera on, that it's always nicer to speak to people's faces and not their photos. I know some people might not be able to, but those who can, it'll be really nice to have more participation. With this, I will turn it to Robert, and you can share your screen and start the presentation. Go ahead.
Thank you, Felipe. I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen. Just give me one moment. Are you able to see the slides, the presentation?
Yes.
But unfortunately, I'm not able to see. Hold on one second. This portion. Okay, it looks like I was able to find what I was looking for. Great. Okay. Well, I'm happy that I'm able to provide this presentation. And being the board member for the World Deaf Architecture in Washington, D.C., I'm happy to be a part of it. And now being the executive director of the World Deaf Architecture, it's been 4 years, but prior to that, I was the founder and president of the WDA in 2016. And I'll be talking briefly about my background. I was born with hearing until I became late deafened due to malpractice in the hospital setting. My parents wanted me to stay at home in New Jersey. And I was in Princeton. They believed when I was 4 years old, my father and I were walking in the streets, and we met somebody, a famous person. We met a celebrity. And that was Albert. Albert Einstein. And that was at the World Physics event. And I was mainstreamed and eventually went to school for architecture. at Cornell University. And I went to my graduate program for both my bachelor's of architecture as well as my master's. And right now we're going to do a brief interpreter switch. One moment.
All right, we can begin. 1 second while he pins me. Can you see me? Oh, I can't see the interpreter. 1 moment. Just bear with us 1 moment. I'm sorry, I can't find the interpreter. 1 moment. Okay, now I see the interpreter here. Okay, so I graduated with my master's degree of architecture in urban design under leadership of my professor, Coalition Rowe. It's actually New England's architecture professor. He taught me so much regarding about the city and the redevelopment of different facilities in the town of Boston. After I received my master's degree, I worked with various architects, and unfortunately, I was not able to get a promotion due to communication barriers. It wasn't until when ADA passed the law for banning discrimination of individuals with disabilities that then I was able to start my career and experience in Washington, D.C., working as a U.S. Access board member. And now I'm currently working as an architect in my home office at Washington, D.C. And right now, I'll be starting my presentation. So that's a little bit about me and how universal design and deaf space design for deaf and hard of hearing people can be used. And I'm excited to be presenting about that today and how that can be applied to other senior citizens who use these spaces. So right now we're going to talk about a little bit about what's going on in senior citizens who are deaf and hard of hearing, especially when they go into assisted living. It's a different environment for them, a very different life. They don't have their relatives with them, and potentially they're with hearing. S202-835. 1 moment, I'm sorry. Okay. And the concept for us is for us to resolve these barrier issues and create more deaf-friendly spaces for senior citizen living. This is a hearing space that's the first initially developed, and I'm hoping that we can work on getting more projects started to bring more deaf-friendly spaces. Perhaps we can get equipment and work with the government on training our staff, as well as other staff who have an awareness with ASL. With senior citizens coming into this assisted living space, we want to make sure that when they're living with other people that they're close with their community and that they're able to socialize just like anyone else. So we're going to move on to my next slide. So most of deaf senior citizens who come into an assisted living facility can also be activated. active and associate with other communities who might also be experiencing hearing loss, sorry. We want to make sure that we're accommodating these spaces and providing deaf-friendly environments for people in these retirement homes who are deaf and hard of hearing, because oftentimes there's no way that this has happened. So now I'm going to be showing you 11 things that we can do. It's a list of universal design and deaf spaces design that we can use in assisted living facilities for deaf and hard of hearing residents. So as you can see right here, the first point I would like to talk about, number 1, is called natural lighting. So some of you might be wondering, what exactly is natural lighting and how does that factor into my goals for this presentation? What I'm really trying to explain is that you want to have light plus openness that prevents shadows from occurring in a space. When we have light and open space, it promotes a lot of safety. For example, people have some visual problems, so they might need more light to help them move around the space safely. Especially when we have more, if we were to have more windows, we have a well-lit environment, and that can improve safety for other people. Lighting as a way of safety, especially depending on the engineering of a room. Sometimes we might have private spaces or community spaces. The accessibility to lights make a big difference. Oftentimes it does depend on the engineering of the space. And as an architect, you can actually figure out where natural lighting comes from and a good source for it. You know, we want to have the sun being able to come through the windows to give that natural light to the environment, especially also in the nighttime when we don't have that access to natural sunlight. We have special lighting set up in specific places to make sure it's well lit. We want to make sure that the environment improves, especially with natural light. That's number 1 priority when it comes to having a deaf-friendly space for senior citizens, especially living in assisted living facilities. So first of all, when I started my first experience as an architect after I left the U.S. Access Board, I did meet some deaf clients who were living in private homes. One of the things that I noticed among meeting these clients was a common need for having more natural light in their facilities. The biggest question is, what will happen when maybe down the road you're 60 or 70 years old, or maybe even 80 years old, and you have to transition to an assisted living facility? That's a different environment from your own home, and oftentimes people see that. People who might have certain kind of limitations, whether it be hearing, whether it be visual cues, they need to move to these specific facilities to accommodate their needs. And making sure that we promote the use of natural lighting, it can become a more comfortable environment for these individuals. This is the section of the building that we can use as a potential design to promote natural lighting. As you can see in this picture, we have glass facing the south, as well as on the right of the building. It shows staircases, okay. You can see that in the white areas is where the natural light can kind of sink in. As you see right there, it has the stair. We have natural light pointing towards the stairs to promote safety for our individuals. Sometimes there are other clients who live in homes that are more open that need more visual cues for communication between two different levels. Maybe in one space, you're on the first floor, and on the second space, you're on the second floor, and you want to be able to communicate with each other. Having that accessibility and openness allows communication to flow freely, especially if you're transitioning from a deaf-friendly home. Oftentimes, we don't see that when it comes to hearing senior citizen living facilities, so we want to make sure that we are matching the needs of our clients the same as they would in a home. For example, you can see right here the glass portrayed in this picture where the sunlight shines through. It helps also with the cost of energy. Some cons regarding natural lighting, as we know, there can be some cons. As we know, as the day progresses, the rooms can become dark. As you can see right here, there's only one window on the side and then just a few other windows in the back. And that's a dining room, you know? And so when the sun goes down, that room becomes pretty dark. I know we don't want to pay more for light in the room, but I feel like there could be a different way for us to still set up some kind of physical space for people who have disabilities to move around safely, especially between two separate spaces. A solution I'd like to propose, as you can see in this picture, we have low E-glass windows on doors. That low E-glass stands for low emission of natural light through the glass and doors. Translucent sunscreen shades, and that can cut down heat transmission. A lot of times people have a hard time seeing what some other person might be doing or saying, especially if they're standing in the front of the glass. With the light reflecting behind them, it can create a glare from the window. So with this kind of design, that translucent shade, you know, in the factories, typically they're called Calwal. It's a good product that they can make for fireplaces to lessen the glare. And it provides more natural light. So that's a similar concept to what I'm trying to portray here. We have certain kinds of shades that can help manage the light. The interesting thing is we typically are pretty sensitive to having like a room have the ability to muffle sound, but when it comes to deaf people, I think we need to prioritize having a room that's more accommodating to light. The next thing I'd like to talk about is accessible and artificial lighting. What is accessible lighting? I'd like to talk about that. And accessible lighting really means having good lighting, as well as having dim lighting. Where sometimes people who have certain visual needs might need the lighting dimmer. So having the ability to control that in an environment would be very beneficial for people who have vision loss as well as hearing loss. And the interpreters are going to switch briefly.
We also want to keep in mind about the transitional area to maintain safety and security in these spaces, especially in an assisted living home throughout the day and night. So this is the sign for artificial, and anything to do with artificial lighting. It doesn't come from the natural light that, like I had mentioned before, the sun. You would have to use the power wiring of the space that the room is designed in. So using electricity, and this would be man-made light. When I mention artificial lighting, that's what I mean. Also LED and fluorescent and tungsten, mercury vapor, all of these different types of materials and equipment to be able to portray artificial lighting. It really depends on the quality of the light wiring. So if you go into a private room and maybe you don't want the light too bright, maybe you would prefer the LED approach, or if you would prefer the mercury, it really just depends. This is all based on communicating and being able to visually see each other while doing that. Maybe a deaf client may prefer to have artificial lighting. And so, for example, in Washington, D.C., in a condo, there's really not enough natural lighting that they can afford and install in their living space. So with artificial lighting, that gives them an opportunity to be able to have that visual space and clarity. And you can see here in this image, the green paint allows the deaf client to be able to see that contrast between the environment and the person that is signing and communicating with them. And you can see the artificial light portrayed in this image. And solutions of design, I would say, based on another deaf living assistant home in Arizona, is seeing the difference in climate, such as Arizona, it's more dry. So you may want to have a wall that isn't too much glare in the room, depending on the lighting and how dark it is, so that your client in those type of spaces, they're able to see and communicate comfortably. And with the glass being how it's set up in this way, versus here, somewhere in the East Coast, there's plenty of sunlight, sun exposure. So you have that natural lighting. It allows for more natural light to come through. And here's another image of a room where a deaf architecture from Arizona. This is their design for a client, for a deaf client. And this is in Palm Springs, California. They said that the client had already built a swimming pool, so had that installed into their living space. And they brought up the idea of the type of lighting which they would like to have installed. And so there's this lighting here that you see in this image where it's curved. And it's this is called a wave light that they installed in the home. So it provides more bright light. And this is a concept that you can keep in mind for your deaf clients that you may design a space for. And you can see the differences between accessible lighting, where it's bright, and this is all natural light based. And you can see the other where it's more artificial light based. And you can see that the space can be darker depending on the client's preference. And now I want to mention about skylights, what is a skylight?
But
It's daylighting skylight plus the daytime.
outside.
And this is all based from outside. Using this saves a lot of energy when designing your spaces for your deaf clients.
What is
I'll give you some examples.
good
We have solo tubes, and from the roof, you'll have a skylight. And really depending on what the client's needs and wants are, if they want natural lighting or not in their space. And you can see on the left side, you have your solo tubes installed. And where my mouse is hovering as of right now, this is what this solo tube looks like in this space. It is small, and this is considered a regular skylight.
Southwest.
And this is located on the southwest of the building. Here's another example for outside. You have a screen, a grid room. So this would be a good environment space for the summertime, especially for the natural lighting. You can see that the natural lighting is coming in and bringing in more natural air into the room and giving more air circulation. And this would allow for your deaf clients, especially senior citizens, to live comfortably. And this is an image based in New Jersey. This is my favorite architect, Louis Kahn. He's a very popular architect for natural lighting in designing this type of space. Now I will be talking about visual alert systems. If senior citizens aren't able to hear or see, or both, what would happen? Lighting is a way to promote safetiness, especially for deaf people who have sensitive vision. Especially if a phone is ringing and they're not able to hear that that phone, they're able to have a visual alarm instead to be able to see if somebody is calling them. Even at a far distance, they're able to see that lighting. And again, it's important to promote safety and install the equipment, especially in an assisted living home. Architectures must be aware of the type of systems that are in place to be able to accommodate your deaf clients' needs. It depends on how many deaf and hard of hearing clients are in an assisted living home. Maybe they may have other disabilities aside from that. They might have dementia. And maybe your client may pick a room that will need artificial lighting, an artificial lighting system based to be able to function properly. And you can see the red wiring and how the system is functioning. And you can see the lighting alarm equipment set up in this space. Here's an example. And you can see there's a lighting underneath the shelf against the wall. And you can see the differences between a wiring system versus a wireless system. We're now transitioning to more wireless alarm systems, especially for the assisted living home spaces.
that or how to
If you have a wiring system, it may be linked to the smoke detector, especially in regards to emergencies of fire. You might see it from the inside or from the outside, and you can see the alarm lighting systems, and the alarm light flashes to indicate if there's an emergency for senior citizens. They'd be able to see that brightness, and it's better for them to be able to know what's going on, especially in an assisted living home. To be able to install this equipment, there needs to be a more intention of where it's being placed, especially in the image such as this. You can see the brightness of the light. And it's more, it especially is very beneficial for those that rely on their vision. Especially if they have hearing or vision loss, they are able to see and hear both the alarm in which any situation such as an emergency situation should come up. And here's one, well, actually there was one client in Washington, DC. They requested a cart roll as for their kitchen space in the hallway. They asked me to design the lighting to have an alarm system, a button they can press, something that can alert them if somebody is breaking into their home.
Yes.
And with that button, especially having to design it for a person who relies on their vision. This doorbell, not so much with hearing, but with deaf people, you have the lighting system where if somebody rings their doorbell, you can see the light flashing. It notifies them that if somebody is at the front door and allows them to be able to meet them at the front. And it's a good system, especially for clients that rely on their vision. And now talking about windows and physical configurations. Here are some pictures I found from another assisted living home, assisted living senior citizen home, and these are good examples. And how people are communing with each other and how the environmental spaces are set up from the inside and out. And you could see where the doors are placed and how everything is set up. These are two separate designs I'll be talking about. Here are the undesirable traits as well as the desirable traits. Closed off rooms. These are things that block, physically block a person when they're walking through a space that might be in the way, in the hallway. This could be very undesirable, especially for a person who has a visual disability, and then they're not able to see or hear people's footsteps. So this can block them visually, not being able to see if there's somebody coming by or not. They're not able to see the person that is in parallel of them. So you want to make sure that the space is open, an open plan concept, which is a desirable trait. A more rounded space will allow the person to be able to track whoever they may be passing by without any complications. And this is a lot better for people that are communicating with each other, especially in a senior citizen living assisted home. And here are some concepts for doors as well.
All right.
So solid light, like hardwood doors, especially depending on, you know, the facility might be a good option, as well as a glass door where someone is able to visually see through, or even a translucent door. For example, you can see here, we have a good picture. You're able to see slightly through the door. but still allowing that privacy. It will also, it helps promote like less physical limitations. People are able to see if someone's coming through the door, and it gives them enough time to move out of the way, while also still promoting a private area in a room. There's so many different kinds of options that we can use for a kind of door in your design to make it more accessible for people living in these assisted living facilities. One thing that's important to consider is the number of people in that facility who are deaf. Sometimes it might be important to know if that person has any physical limitations. Do we want to install a door that can be pushed open or pulled open? If someone who has cerebral palsy and they use a wheelchair, sometimes it's a little bit easier for someone to push open a door versus having to pull open a door. So those are some different factors to consider. Another thing, if someone is relatively weak, making sure we have a door that does not weigh a lot to open. And can be good the way the lever pushes too. If someone has some cognitive limitations or whatnot, they might have having a handlebar would be good for them to allow them to open up the door because it gives them more accessibility. And it's also following the Americans with Disabilities Act, promoting accessibility in an environment. The next thing I'd like to talk about in an architectural design are the walls. There are so many different kinds of wall options that architects can pick for a good concept to create a deaf-friendly space. We have contemporary kinds of walls all the way to traditional kinds of walls. On the left, you can see a picture with a solid wall. It promotes privacy in a room. No one has the ability to get inside or see what's going on, especially like if you're in an environment where people are typically walking around in, it might be good. Sometimes in other environments, it might be good to have a room that has glass to allow more spatial expansion. People can see that that space is occupied, especially if it's in a place that's you're not trying to have private. Maybe you have some deaf people in there who are just like a hearing person can yell across the room and someone can hear them. You have a deaf person in that room who might want to sign, and they can sign through the glass to the other person, promoting accessibility for any kind of disability. Lastly, we have translucent walls that allows for partial visibility. You can see that people are moving around in there. It can definitely depend on the quality of lighting too, on how this impacts the wall and the area. Like to also kind of touch upon floors. As I said, we have lots of different options we can pick from. It really depends on what your client desires. Maybe they want something in a more quiet space. So, maybe you might resort to more wood, or if someone has a wheelchair, that would be a good option. Maybe if someone depends on visual cues, having color to help show them areas where they can walk can be very helpful. Now I'd like to touch upon materials, colors, and textures. You have bright colors. Some projects might require that, especially people that have visual problems. You want to have something that is bright so people can see and identify the specific room and know the difference between one room from another. So maybe you want to have one room red and then another room a different color so that person can see that color and identify what kind of room that is. Sometimes we might want lighter colors as well to help with people who might have different kinds of visual needs. Moving on to elevators and mechanical systems, there's options as well. There's different kinds of elevators architects can use. On the left, you see that's more of a private elevator that sometimes can be used in a residential space. It's a private elevator between 2 floors. It provides a door. It's accessible for wheelchairs or people who have other cognitive limitations. In this other example, you can see that there's glass, which allows people to see the elevator moving forward, no matter even if the door is closed. You also have this other elevator that shows you when the elevator has arrived to the specific floor it's designated to. If someone is deaf, sometimes they might not have the ability to hear the elevator ding like we hearing people can. So having a visual to know when the elevator is on the first floor, when it might open would be great, is a great hack. As we know, there has been problems with COVID-19, and a lot of times their systems have changed to help reduce the spread of COVID. And it's very important that we promote HVAC in assisted living facilities to promote a safe space and a space that makes it easier for people who might depend on touch for communication. So making sure that we have a space with a furnace or AC, having vibrating ducts, vents blowing in the wrong places, or having COVID-19 spread that's not good for us. One example that I can think of, some deaf people have cochlear implants and they have problems with like different kinds of installations in the roof. They can hear background noise and it can be very distracting for them, especially for someone with a cochlear implant. In addition to that, you might just have senior citizens who have a hearing aid and they hearing that noise or having that constant vibration from certain furnaces or vibrating ducts in the roof can be distracting towards someone. So it can cause isolation. You have other kinds of things where you can make a room more soundproof to help promote that. So moving on to technologies, we have iPhones nowadays and different kinds of smart devices that make it easier for us to use, especially for people who need assistance with technology. Sometimes people don't have access to that, which is very unfortunate. But if we do have access to a phone, it's good to have enlarged text and making sure that we promote the use of a phone in that kind of facility so people can maintain relationships and be able to work and talk in their community. So making sure that these places have Wi-Fi so people can get online to talk to their friends who are hard of hearing or deaf is very important, as well as making devices that can be more accessible for people that have hard of hearing. Maybe having something with an elevated volume can help give people the same right to their communication device as others. I'd like to now move on to Deaf Space design guidelines. What Deaf Space is, how Deaf Space works, can Deaf Space be improved for residents in our facilities? This one print was developed by a deaf architect from Gallaudet University. Their name was Hanal Bonham. Unfortunately, they're no longer working there. But I did used to work with them. They were a colleague of mine before I got involved with the WDA. And he has a wonderful presentation on deaf space for AIA. He did a meeting for people in Chicago in 2015 where he did some research on changing the systems for deaf people and allowing more space for physical movement. Hopefully that if with this presentation, we can improve for more space in deaf assisted living facilities. He was one of the first deaf people to start. One of his quotes states that deaf people are first, last, and for all time the people of I. In World War I, he was the founder of the National Association for the Deaf. He was a teacher of American Sign Language where deaf people learned ASL because unfortunately they didn't have any jobs. There was a lot of discrimination at that time because we didn't have the ADA, and a lot of times people would try to communicate with someone. So Vedets was the founder to help assist in communication for people as the times have changed. I'd like to touch upon another individual who was deafblind. I'm sure some of you are familiar with Helen Keller. Because of a sickness as a child, they became blind and deaf. It was very difficult for them at the time to be educated, but through time, you can see that when they were first able to discover the concept of water, their brain function changed. As we know, the famous story about when they felt water, they scream with excitement. And that's when they started the journey of learning what something is without sight or sound. As time went on, they learned more and more, and then they finally were able to graduate from Radical College in Boston. And they were a founder of Prokin Academics for the Deaf and Blind of Watertown, where she actually learned her first ever term of water. So it's really interesting how that was set up. They were very supportive of the military in Watertown. So when people would come home from the world, veterans especially, if they had different kinds of physical disabilities, oftentimes it would be difficult for jobs for them. Oftentimes having the label of handicap prevents that ability. As you can see, we use this sign handicap. It's an old sign, but now I do want to clarify, deaf people are not handicapped, but because we don't have any kinds of physical limitations. Because of Helen Keller's work in the community and being able to set up different kinds of committees, assisting women in the protests for voting, working with veterans and whatnot, they've had a wonderful impact in the community. So that's a little bit of history about her. I want to now move on to talking about 5 different categories of deaf space design guidelines, and we're going to switch interpreters.
These
These 5 categories are important to keep in mind,
Yes.
especially when you're designing a specific space. Space and proximity, that is where deaf individuals, they need a means of communicating and the physical space in meeting those needs. You have 2 people standing across from each other, signing with each other, and they use their body to be able to communicate. And the space needs to allow for that communication. So definitely keeping in mind that deaf people need more space to be able to communicate, since they are using their entire body, whereas hearing people, they don't. And that's why you see them in closer quarters with each other, whereas deaf people aren't.
Could have let's see what we had.
So it's very important to keep in mind for people that are in need, to be aware of their spatial awareness, and keeping in mind that they do need to be able to see what's behind them as well as in front of them. So having a sort of reference point to be able to see if people are coming up from behind them, and having a mirror installed gives that visual access for that deaf person. And in terms of proximity, I want to mention here, it's the relationship between the wideness of a space and following the ADA requirements. This is to be able to design a space where people are able to walk through. And one example I want to talk about is a building for such as a student center. A student center requires a wider space that have columns in the middle of the hallway. And so for that, people aren't able to see. There's some sort of obstruction, but then you have a flooring with different colors that range from light to dark colors. And this is able to ensure people are identifying which room they are entering. But with that column, it blocks that visual accessibility, but the colors on the flooring helps them identify where they're going, but then you want to make sure that the communication access is there as well. So we don't want that column to be there blockading them, but being able to create an open space and keeping in mind of that proximity ensures that accessibility in the design that you are coming up with. You want to keep in mind of the quality of lighting from the inside as well as the out. Acoustics and EM. EM stands for electromagnetic needs, and these are for people that have cochlear implants and have issues with the sound in the environment. This is an example of what I was mentioning before about proximity or proxemics. This is a copy of an image from the Deaf Space Design Guideline. This is to ensure communication and keeping in mind of the spaces in which people are residing in, so that they are able to make eye contact with each other at all times. And in regards to senior citizen space, to having a circular sort of shaped space versus a square, it makes it a lot easier to make eye contact and communication to flow much smoother if it's in the shape of a circle, and especially when they are communing in group spaces. I have an image of a public space versus a private space and what the needs are for an assisted living home for senior citizens. So you can see the differences among the two that you may be able to keep in mind for when you're designing an assisted living space. You see the pros and cons and which you are designing the space for your clients. Some prefer the square shape, which is fine. And these are for people that rely on their hearing and they don't have that visual need, versus where in a deaf space, you want to keep in mind of the circular shape of the room for the deaf and hard of hearing who rely on their vision to be able to communicate with each other. For example, like a dining room area, you would want to keep this type of design in mind. This is one design example for an assisted living space. So this would be an example of a center core area for people to communicate and generally commune in. So as people are moving throughout the building, you want to keep this centerpiece in mind when people are going to different parts of the building and where they meet and go into another part of the building and seeing the different directions it goes in. And the center core is very important to keep in mind, especially in assisted living facilities. This is all based on my research for assisted living facilities. So you have senior citizens who do not have physical issues versus you have senior citizens who may have a stroke or dementia or other disabilities. And these are things to keep in mind that if they need assistance with and they need extra staff to be able to help them move around the space, you can see the differences between those spaces. And so for senior citizens who do not have physical limitations, they are able to have a variety of options for which they want to feel a lot more comfortable in, and which this space is designed for their needs versus the ones that do have physical limitations. And like I had mentioned before about the natural lighting in terms of the central core of the design of the building, to keep that in mind. If it's much more circular, these are for people that do have physical limitations. So you want to be able to keep in mind of these designs when working with different clients. And projects such as these may require more research on your end to ensure that there is accessibility, the needs are met for accessibility, especially for those that have physical limitations. And you can see the differences between the rows of units. You can see all of these sections divided by 4. And this is an example of translucent walling installed. And you can see the lighting and how it is coming from the outside to the inside. You can see on the bottom of the picture, there is a lot more brightness there in the design that ensures translucent, a translucent wall so that it reduces the glare. And so it allows for your senior citizen clients to feel a lot more comfortable in the space that they're in. The last point I want to share. This is a video, is about 7 minutes long. It's a short video clip. There's no need for sound, but you can definitely read the captions when I play this video for you all. Let me go ahead and share it in just one moment. Excuse me for the ads. I'm sorry about that.
Okay.
Okay,
Mm,
that's all I have for the presentation. So thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Robert. I think this is a good segue to move to Chuck, who is the executive director of the New England Homes for the Deaf, to give us his perspective. I think the home in Massachusetts was mentioned, and I think it was yours. So it's good to know that. Go ahead. The floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And got a little music going there. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. And I come at this from a very different perspective as an operator of nursing homes and healthcare facilities, both in the hearing world and in the deaf world and the deaf culture, at currently being at New England Homes for the Deaf in Massachusetts. And when I thought about what I was going to say in this presentation and our time together, and I'm going to be brief because Robert did such an amazing job of going through the elements, in my opinion, that are really the building blocks for design. And when I think about design, I think about the need for it to foster safety, relationships, inclusion, and accessibility. I also think about Disney. Believe it or not, when I think about how design and architecture cascades through every experience, whether you're deaf or hearing, and in a minute I'm going to tie this into New England Homes for the Deaf. You go to Disney and their number one priority is safety, but you don't see that through the design. They have systems where you don't see the characters changing clothes, coming to work. You don't see the infrastructure that's been built through design and architecture to promote safety and give a wonderful experience. So now translate that, if you would, translate that experience into a day in the life of a resident at, let's say, New England Homes for the Deaf. And how, if you think about their day, and that would be my challenge, think about someone's day and think about your day. I will tell you, say there's a resident there who is deaf, all of our residents are deaf or hard of hearing or deafblind. Say this individual has Usher's syndrome, which means you're losing your vision. So this individual is low vision. And say this individual, in addition to that, has some memories, some early onset dementia. So, like all of us, they wake up. But the difference at New England Homes for the Deaf, they're going to need some help getting ready. they're going to need some help getting dressed, getting kind of oriented to the day. So they get up and someone comes in to check on them. So it's a very much a written rule in healthcare. You don't enter someone's room, their space, without knocking. Well, I can knock all day, but if they're deaf or deafblind or hard of hearing, they're not going to hear me. So in essence, I just entered their home without knocking if there's not some type of some type of alert system, as Robert spoke about. What we have at New England Homes for the Deaf is we have, it's like a doorbell, but it has a strobe light to alert that individual that someone is coming in their space. Now, add an additional challenge for this individual, their low vision. So that strobe light has to be adjusted in order for them to see. If they're totally blind, perhaps there's something that can be connected to their bed. If they're in bed, that will make it vibrate to let them know someone is there. So this individual gets up. They're in a wheelchair. So they get in their wheelchair. They want to pick out their clothes for the day. So they wheel over. They open their closet. And guess what? Their rack of clothes, the pole in the closet, is too high. Doing something simple like bringing it down to that individual's level where they can access their clothing in a wheelchair is huge. That impacts their quality of life, promotes choice, it promotes independence. A simple modification that can be done, that if done thoughtfully, can change a person's day, if you will. Then, they get dressed, they're in their wheelchair, and they're getting ready to wheel out in the hallway to go down to breakfast. They're hungry, they want their coffee. But wait, they have some early onset dementia. There is the floor, our maintenance department has done an amazing job. And this is hypothetical, this is not really our flooring, but we have very good flooring. We had, prior to our good flooring, let's say we had flooring that had to be buffed, so it'd be clean, so it would look nice and give a good appearance, and you want it to be shiny. But this individual has some early dementia. So they stop the wheelchair, they reach out with their arm to stop anybody from walking because they view that as water. They're trying to save someone. They put their arm out. That's a true story that actually happened to me in another facility, another community. But they put their arm out in a very aggressive manner because they were trying to protect me from what they perceived as water based on that flooring and the lighting and the reflection. So that's why the design of the flooring is so key and so vital. Something as simple with deafblind residents as the threshold, the threshold in the flooring. We have people that have canes that are blind. We have people in wheelchairs. We have people with walkers. So the threshold is a very vital thing in considering flooring. Go take it a step further. This individual goes on, has their day. They want to call their family, so they're going to use a video phone, which is really a phone. But you can call someone and see them and sign. It's a great technological thing that's a gift to residents and their families. But you know what? I don't think I want to use the video phone today because Ms. Jones is sitting there watching. And if I don't have a video phone in my room and it's in a common area, is their privacy? How are we going to design so their dignity and privacy is respected? ASL, as you all are experiencing it, is a very visual language. It can lend itself to not promoting privacy. And we all want private conversations. So when we do table placement in our dining room, that's one of the things we have to think about, like privacy related to signing and people, We had a resident complaining, this is a very true story, a couple weeks ago. And she said they are always looking at me. And our culture, our person who's an expert at culture, said, Chuck, it doesn't mean they're looking at her, it means they're listening to her. Because in a visual language, in that experience, that person experienced that as, oh, they're eavesdropping, if you will. They're talking about me. They're knowing my business. They're knowing what I have to say. So that's where design and privacy, whether it's a video phone, whether it's in a dining room, there's so many components of how design and architecture really can change people's life. And, as an operator, I partnered with DeMille Schaefer recently, and we did a project to change the flooring and the wall coverings. And these were all real conversations we were having about our residents, to the point where we had picked a flooring for a dining room. It was really, we agreed. I was the one that, made the call, so it's all on me. But then we started putting it down, and it was too busy for our residents. It would not promote the environment we wanted to promote. So fortunately, we worked with the team at DeMille Schaefer, and we pivoted. We're getting ready to embark on a project at New England Homes for the Deaf to build 140 apartments with preference to deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind seniors, individuals over 55. Last night, was at the zoning board and was talking about the widths of the hallway and how they were going to be wider so people could communicate, so they could have that socialization, design concepts of a courtyard, and then, you could move into, landscape architecture, if you will, and how if you design a deafblind walkway, where a person who's deafblind, and we have this in New England Homes for the Deaf, we're in the infancy stages, but we have it, can walk outside and be independent and hold on to a rail and experience and this is what we're fundraising for, experience like a sensory guard, a very olfactory experience. Their other senses can be stimulated through this experience to promote independence. And this to me is all elements of design. And that's why it's such a gift to be here this afternoon and say, please, when you are designing for deaf, when you're designing for senior living, people with individuals that experience dementia, neurodiverse individuals, please be mindful. I know everyone's familiar with UDL, but it really does make an equal playing field for all people, whether they have physical challenges, whether they have cognitive challenges, or any other challenges. So thank you very much for all you do and for listening and considering this important topic. And again, Robert, thank you for the phenomenal information. And Philippe, thank you for the opportunity this afternoon.
Thank you both for your knowledge and insights on deaf and blind space. I want to see if anyone in the audience has questions. I think there was a question in the chat about the width of the hallway previously. I don't know if Chuck or Robert, you would like to address this first, and then we could see if anyone has other questions to the two of you.
So let me ask you, what's the standard? I think I know the answer to this because I was discussing this last night, but I don't want to get it wrong. Is a standard hallway, say in an apartment, would you say 6 feet, the standard hallway?
If it's not a nursing home, yes, it is usually for senior housing, no less than 6 feet.
Perfect. So that's what I thought. I just needed a point of reference so I didn't get my facts confused. So our hallways, I will tell you, and I don't know if it's, a regulatory thing or a best practice, but last night I did hear in the housing project we're doing in the independent living apartments, the hallways are going to be 9 feet to allow socialization, to allow that for people to stand, be beside each other, to sign for groups of people, for open flow communication.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I don't know if Robert has different experience, but we're doing 9 feet, and I saw the question, and I had to reference myself.
Yes, from my experience, I would say wider hallways, spaces. These are designed for walkways and especially abiding by the ADA, no less than 6 feet wide. Especially keeping in mind of the wheelchair and the traffic, people traffic, as well as the aides in the assisted living home. We want to make sure it's as wide as possible so that people who have physical limitations that do rely on mobility for wheelchairs, and that the floor pathway as well as the hallway is wide enough to accommodate these needs, especially in an assisted living home. And it also definitely depends on the scale of the area, keeping that in mind. Architecture should be familiar with the universal design and the intention behind it in terms of accessibility as the way things look. But it definitely must be a much wider space than 6 feet.
Thank you.
Also keeping in mind of the grip and the handlebars if somebody needs assistance with that, or even keeping in mind of the textures, being able to identify the different spaces. And it depends on the projects and what's required, and getting the numbers all figured out and keeping that in mind of your design plans. And making sure that your plans are being inclusive as much as possible. I hope that answers your question about the sizing of the hallway and it being wide.
Thank you. Anyone would like to add a question to our speakers?
This is Robert. I see a note, another question in the chat. It was in regards to the ambient sound system. I was looking in the chat and somebody had asked about that and being able to install that ambience system. I know most people who are hard of hearing or that wear hearing aids, they're able to hear a loop, especially that one that's again like that reflects the sound on the wall. So they want to be able to hear more sound, and it also depends on the deaf and hard of hearing that are around. They may or may not prefer the ambient sound. So it really just depends on their needs and preferences, whether they have an ability to hear or not, or use a cochlear implant. It just really depends on what that specific project is needed, and keeping account how many senior citizens are living in the home and that have that need. So it really just depends.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to make a comment. One thing that I learned today was the need to design, because we talk about designing that brings people together, but it's a net additional layers of mindfulness for us to really encourage deaf and blind people to socialize. It's a vital need of all of us. And that's something that, how can we make our spaces, whether senior housing or a public building, ready to allow people who are deaf and blind to be able to socialize in that space. And I think the person who, in the video, made the case very much how isolated her mother would be in a place that will not allow her to socialize with the language or the ways of socialization that she's able to. Chuck, I don't know Robert, you mentioned early on people transitioning from a home that might be set up uh, for their hearing loss and blindness, and how do they transition into a place that is a senior housing, and how difficult is this transition in your mind, Chuck, to move into a community like yours, and what levels of support do you provide?
Yeah, and first of all, for anyone, whether deaf, blind, or hard of hearing, for anyone to transition from their home, to leave, we all like our homes, we all are creatures of habit, we get very
Yes.
comfortable, we have our stuff. To leave that behind due to having a need is always very hard and very isolative for the individual, and it takes a while for people to make the transition, even with good family support and good facility support, and even support groups outside the facility or as part of the facility. Add the additional layer if someone is transitioning into a facility that does not speak their language, that does not have people like them. We all gravitate to people like ourselves. One of the things that I've learned in my time at New England Homes for the Deaf, not only is ASL and communication important, that is one element of deaf culture, like any other culture, that's with certain cultural attributes, certain cultural traits, certain cultural values, certain cultural ethos, if you will. So oftentimes if you go into a hearing home, you're leaving that culture behind. And we have many, many people who come to us who have been in a home that's hearing. It's often hard for them to even leave that home. But when they come to us, they typically they find an amazing community. It's not perfect. Do we have communication challenges? Absolutely. Do we have people signing at different levels? Absolutely. But we do have a culture of, and we work on a culture, Helen Keller was one of our board members. So we have a long, rich history, 104 years. But we still struggle with the cultural issue of people, hearing versus deaf, because most of our employees are hearing employees. We have about 25% that are deaf. We would like to have more. But at any rate, the way this impacts, to answer Philippe's question, or his thought is, for someone, first of all, to move, I can't imagine moving into a facility, and I'll put myself, so I'm hearing, I'm not a great signer, but let's put me in a facility where the only language was ASL. Let's flip the script. There would be some challenges for me, I would adapt, I'd learn, but there'd be certain conversations, and even now in my own ASL, there are certain conversations that I don't have the skill set to have. Those deep, meaningful conversations. I can say, how are you? And things like that, the surface stuff. But for the deep, meaningful conversations, so that would be hard. So I would ask people to think about that as far as how hard it is. But we do support people that come into our community. And, we probably get calls, I'll be honest with you, I probably get 1 to 2 calls a month from different states about people being interested in starting a deaf nursing home, a deaf assisted living, a deaf senior care. And our advice is, and we're willing to help anybody, try to find a home that's already in existence and maybe work on improving their culture, or having a deaf wing or something of that nature, or a wing that focuses on that culture. So I feel like Philippe and all, that was a long-winded answer to a very simplistic question, but it is so vital when someone moves into it's very traumatic. I don't know if any of you moved family members into nursing homes. It's very, very traumatic for all. It's hard, but add the fact, layer on top of the fact, and we have people that make the decision not to come to us like this woman in Maine, and I felt for her, broke my heart, who wanted to be near her mom, but there was no deaf home. So she
Yeah.
made the right decision for her and her family, and it sounded like she was doing all the right things. But it is very, very
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah.
Thank you, Philippe.
I appreciate. Yes, Robert, I just want to be mindful of everyone's time. So let's go of Robert with the closing.
Okay, yes, I'd like to answer your question in terms of the New England Home for the Deaf. And entering that facility, I've been there already twice, and I've met several deaf people that have lived in that home, and they just hate it. Their experience was just really different for them, and functioning where people who are at an average functioning level, or maybe even have some mental issues going on there, and then being lower class, and just, people that are planning to retire and they go into this facility, they don't feel comfortable because, they've been mainstreamed all their lives, and going to a deaf assisted living home versus other facilities where you have, the deaf person mainstreamed in a hearing environment, may be a better design for them versus the New England home design. And some much rather prefer a facility that is much closer to family members and relatives to be able to see them at least even for a short time. And, having a rich environment. I know, especially from my experience working, being deaf and working with other deaf people myself, that they much rather go to an assisted living home where they are able to be mainstreamed with the hearing community as a whole. So there are different preferences in that respect. So thank you for allowing me to answer that question.
I think we're just starting to scratch the surface, but it is very close to 7. I want to be very thankful to first, I want to thank the interpreters who have been with us. It has been a very specific conversation, and I appreciate your thoroughness and your time with us. I also want to thank Chuck and Robert for this very meaningful conversations with all of us. I really appreciate your time. We need to design more inclusive spaces. We as architects and designers need to learn more. How can we make our spaces for seniors more inclusive of all seniors? And of course, there is more layers of inclusivity that we need to keep in mind. And this is for the deaf and blind people. So I hope this discussion has spurred some of our curiosity, has given us a little bit of a path to continue to do more research so that we continue to do spaces that are supportive for the older adults. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. Thank you, our speakers. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.